They say corporate life is about keeping your head down and playing the long game. But what happens when you play by the rules, give your best years to a company, and still get stabbed in the back by someone who's only been there 6 months? I found out the hard way. My name's Daniel HART. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Ohio, and until a few months ago, I was a systems engineer for a mid-sized tech firm that liked to call itself disruptive, but ran on coffee, duct tape, and people like me who kept things from falling apart. I wasn't flashy. I didn't climb ladders fast. But I was the guy you called when the servers crashed, when payroll glitched, or when some exec decided they needed a new dashboard built by yesterday. For 8 years, I kept the back end humming. I worked late, skipped holidays, trained half the new hires. I wasn't a star, but I was solid, and I thought that meant something. The day I got fired started like any other. I came in early, as usual, made my coffee, sat down at my corner desk in the IT bullpen, booted up my terminal, and started combing through logs. But there was a weird tension in the air, like the smell before a summer thunderstorm. People were being extra polite. Slack channels were unusually quiet. And when I got the meeting invite from Greg Daniels, the new VP of Operations, I knew something was up. Greg had barely spoken to me since he came on board, and he sure as hell didn't call people into closed-door meetings for fun. Greg was a guy straight out of a tech bro starter kit. Mid-40s, too much hair product, always trying to sell his management style like it was a TED Talk. He came in swinging, tossing around words like efficiency and lean transformation, while gutting departments and handing pink slips to anyone who wasn't young, loud, and willing to work 70-hour weeks for startup stock options. He had that fake empathy thing down cold, smiling like he cared, even while he cut your legs out from under you. He didn't waste much time. "Dan, we really appreciate the work you've done here," he started, hands folded like he was about to pray. "But the company's going through a strategic realignment, and your position's been impacted." Impacted. Like I was a pothole he ran over on the way to lunch. I stared at him, the words slow to register, then nodded. Tight-lipped, controlled. I'd seen him do this to other people. I wasn't going to give him the drama he probably hoped for. He handed me a packet. 2 weeks severance. Immediate termination. No warning, no prior feedback, just done. You can grab your things today. It will deactivate your credentials by 5. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out with a calm I didn't feel. But inside? I was boiling. Because Greg didn't know the scripts his team now relied on, the ones that ran payroll, provisioning, and vendor payments, were mine, and I still had access. I packed up my desk, slow, methodical, like I was wrapping up a project instead of getting shown the door. A few coworkers came by with that same awkward half smile, the kind that says, "I'm sorry, but I'm glad it's not me." I didn't blame them. We all knew how unstable things had gotten under Greg. Still, it stung. 8 years, and the goodbye was a recycled box, 2 weeks' pay and a nod. As I slid my mug into the box, white ceramic, chipped at the rim, with "System Error Coffee Not Found" printed on the side, I thought about the nights I'd stayed late to catch back-end bugs, or logged in on weekends to restart production servers during off hours so the sales team wouldn't notice. No overtime. No thanks. Just the silent expectation that the system would never break. I was that system, and now I was obsolete, apparently. When I turned in my badge, the kid at the front desk looked more upset than Greg did. "Man, I thought you were like, permanent," he said, eyebrows up. I just gave him a small smile, the kind you use when you're trying to keep your pride intact. I walked out the front doors with my box in one hand, my coat slung over the other. The fall wind hit my face like a slap. Sharp, cold, grounding. That's when it really hit me. I had no job, no paycheck coming after 2 weeks, and no idea what came next. But I also had no NDA, no HR breathing down my neck, and no one looking over my shoulder. And I still had access, not to everything. They'd cut off my email, and my admin rights on Slack and internal tools were gone by the time I got home. But they missed a few things. It was subtle, the way our infrastructure had been patched together over the years. Legacy systems held up by custom scripts, automations I'd built and tested alone because no one else had the time or the understanding to help. Those weren't connected to the employee provisioning system. They lived on their own. Quiet, unnoticed, running on schedule like clockwork. I logged into one of the vendor payment dashboards using a backdoor credential, something I'd set up years ago for emergencies. No red flags, no warnings. It just let me in. That was the first moment I realized how blind Greg and his team really were. They didn't even understand the foundation they were standing on. They just assumed everything would keep running. So I ran a test, a small one. I isolated the payroll disbursement for executive leadership. Just that group. Not accounting, not hourly staff. Just Greg and his circle of cronies. Then I paused it. Froze the job. Didn't delete it. Didn't trigger an alert. Just a quiet little hiccup in the pipeline. They wouldn't notice right away, maybe not even for a week. But when payday hit and Greg didn't see a deposit in his account, he'd start asking questions. And the answers wouldn't come easy, because no one else knew where to look. By the time Friday rolled around, I was sitting in a quiet booth at my favorite diner, sipping bad coffee and refreshing a LinkedIn job posting like it owed me something. I hadn't heard anything yet. No angry emails, no blocked call attempts, no sign that anyone knew what I'd done. But I wasn't looking for fireworks. This was a slow burn. The kind of move where the silence is the loudest part. I figured Greg would notice sometime around 9 a.m. when his personal banking app showed no paycheck. He probably assumed it was a banking delay at first. By noon, he'd be asking finance. And that's when things would start to get interesting, because finance didn't control the actual automation behind executive pay disbursement. They just triggered the process and waited for my old scripts to push everything to the bank. They didn't know how it worked. They just knew it did. Until now. At 2:13 p.m., I got the first ping on my burner email. It was from Lisa Monroe, Director of Finance. We'd worked together for years. She was sharp, overworked, and smarter than anyone on Greg's team. I'd liked her, still did. Her email was short, but tense. Dan, sorry to bother you. I know you're no longer with us, but we've hit a snag in the executive disbursement run. Did you happen to leave notes behind or documentation on the automation job? We're trying to trace a payroll issue and can't find the source file. I stared at the screen for a long minute. Part of me wanted to help her. She wasn't the target. But that's the thing about revenge. It's never clean. There's always some splash damage. I drafted a reply, then deleted it. I couldn't play both sides. If I stepped in now, it would tip my hand. The whole point was to let Greg feel the weight of uncertainty. To make him sweat, not just from a missed paycheck, but from realizing how brittle the structure really was. I closed the laptop and let it sit. By evening, I started hearing things. Texts from old co-workers, none of them direct, but each one like a puzzle piece. Did you hear what happened to payroll? Greg is losing it. Whole floor's in chaos. It felt good. Not the petty kind of good, but something deeper. Like justice, slow-cooked and personal. I wasn't out to burn the place down. I wasn't hacking servers or draining accounts. I was just showing the cracks, reminding them that people like me mattered, that the quiet ones, the ones who didn't speak in buzzwords or wear blazers to Zoom meetings, were still the spine of the whole damn thing. By Sunday night, they still hadn't figured it out. I knew because Lisa tried again, this time more direct. If there's anything you can share, just a hint, We'd really appreciate it. We're stuck." I didn't respond. Because I wasn't done yet. Monday morning came, and the first thing I did was check the server logs. Not from work. I didn't need their network. The scripts I wrote ran off a secure cloud instance tied to a personal development account they never knew existed. It had started as a sandbox environment for testing patches, a harmless little side lane that somehow became the staging ground for half the automation in their finance stack. Greg never asked questions about how things worked. He just wanted results. So I gave him results. Quiet, reliable ones that he never bothered to understand. The logs showed exactly what I expected. Failed payroll execution for the 4th day in a row. Someone had tried to manually override the job. Twice. And both times, the system bounced it. Not because it was broken, but because I made it that way. The process required authentication through a private key file. That file lived on my encrypted drive. And without it, the job just looped in purgatory. At noon, I got a voicemail. Not from Lisa this time, but from Greg himself. His tone had changed. Gone was the smug, polished confidence. What I heard instead was a man trying to stay calm while the floor under him cracked. "Hey Dan, this is Greg Daniels. Look, we're having some hiccups with the payroll automations and, I wanted to ask if you'd be open to a quick consult. Just a short call. Happy to compensate you for your time. No pressure, but yeah, would appreciate it if you could get back to me. Thanks." I played it twice. Then again. Hearing his voice like that, carefully measured but bleeding panic at the edges, was more satisfying than I expected. He didn't know yet that I wasn't some disgruntled kid throwing a tantrum. I was calm, focused, precise. This wasn't revenge out of rage. This was payback with a scalpel. I didn't return the call. Instead, I pulled out a small notepad and started sketching. Not code, just thoughts. I wasn't going to wreck anything permanently. That wasn't the goal. The truth is, I didn't want to hurt the people still working there. I knew what it was like to rely on that next check. And despite everything, there were good folks on the team. But I needed Greg to feel powerless, to sit in the mess he helped create. That's the thing about cutting loose experienced people. You don't always know what invisible threads they were holding together. By Tuesday, the silence broke again, this time with an offer. Formal. From HR. They wanted to bring me back. Not full-time, of course. A contractor, 60-day engagement. Critical systems advisement. Double my old hourly rate. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was what I'd expected. And not. There was something deeply American about it, I realized. The way corporations don't apologize. They incentivize. They don't admit mistakes. They outsource them. Hire back the very people they discard when it's convenient, as if money erases betrayal. I didn't say no. But I didn't say yes either. Because now I was in control. I let the offer sit for 24 hours, long enough to make them sweat, but not long enough for them to risk moving on. That was the game now. Timing. Greg needed me yesterday, but his ego would only let him wait so long before he tried something drastic. I knew the type. He wouldn't admit fault, not even to himself. He'd frame my return as strategic flexibility or temporary expertise, anything but what it really was, an admission that he'd broken something he couldn't fix. When I finally responded, I didn't go through HR. I emailed Greg directly. Short, polite, but firm. I told him I'd consider consulting, under a few conditions. First, I wanted full control over the systems I'd built. No oversight, no hand-holding. Second, I wanted the contract to run through my LLC, not some temp agency they worked with. And third, I wanted a clause, buried in the paperwork, that gave me final authority over any changes made to my automation stack during the term. In other words, I wasn't just coming back. I was coming back above him. It took less than 2 hours for his reply to hit my inbox. He didn't even bother to push back. Said the terms sounded reasonable. HR followed up an hour later with a draft contract. I reviewed it carefully. Twice. Everything was there, everything I'd asked for, and still, I hesitated. Not out of fear, out of something deeper. A part of me wondered if I was just falling back into the same machine that chewed me up before. But then I remembered the cold handshake, the smug smile, the way he said strategic realignment, like it was a math problem, not a man's life. I signed the contract at 7:18 p.m. By 9 the next morning, I was back in the system. New credentials, elevated access, same old dashboard I'd stared at for years. Only this time, the badge didn't feel like a leash. It felt like a key. Greg scheduled a video call that afternoon. He looked tired, hair out of place, voice tight around the edges. He tried to play it cool. "Glad to have you back on board, Dan. We're, lucky to have your expertise." I nodded, said nothing. He smiled like he thought we were allies again. And for a moment, I let him think that. I spent the rest of the day tracing the disbursement path. Everything was still intact. No one had touched the core logic. They'd prodded around the edges like amateurs poking a bear with a stick. I unfroze the job with one command line. 40 minutes later, executive payroll cleared. Greg probably sighed with relief and gave himself the credit in some private Slack channel. He could have it. Because that wasn't the win. The win was what came next, when I restructured the job to send weekly notifications directly to me. Quiet, invisible oversight. They thought they'd patched the leak. They didn't realize I now held the faucet. Over the next 6 weeks, I became the ghost in the machine. My official title was infrastructure consultant, but in reality, I was the cleanup crew for a mess Greg never understood. I worked from home, logged in silently, and cleaned up their fragile house of cards piece by piece. Not to save them, just to make sure no one else got hurt when it collapsed again. I fixed the scripts, added documentation, even built a dashboard with color-coded alerts that a first-year intern could understand. I made it idiot-proof, knowing full well the idiots were still in charge. Greg barely spoke to me after that first call. Maybe he thought silence would reassert dominance, or maybe he just didn't like facing the reminder that his empire had cracked without me. Either way, I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for the people still there. The quiet ones who nodded thanks over Slack, the finance team who could finally sleep through payday, and the junior dev who messaged me at 2 a.m. just to say, "You saved us." That was enough. My contract ended on a Tuesday. No fanfare, no thank you email, just a polite message from HR confirming the offboarding and asking if I'd consider staying on in a part-time advisory capacity. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I'd already done what I came to do. But before I logged out for the last time, I left one final note buried in the documentation. Not malicious, not even hidden, just a simple comment at the top of the payroll automation file. A system is only as stable as the people who maintain it. Don't confuse silence with security. I shut my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. For the first time in months, it wasn't bitterness I felt. It was clarity. I'd been part of a system that rewarded noise over knowledge, ego over experience. And for once, I'd tilted the scales the other way. Not with a virus or a data breach, but with quiet, strategic pressure. Just enough to make them see the cost of taking people like me for granted. I didn't need revenge anymore. I got respect. And in this country, where dignity gets traded for job titles and pensions vanish 3 days before they vest, sometimes respect is the only currency that matters.